and there is no unified set of metrics. Okay? Same happens with the social. And the social is quite interesting because if you look, for instance, at Europe and North America, we would probably have a very different view on what the KPIs associated to the social are. In North America, social tends to be associated to equal rights, discrimination, gender, minority issues. Okay? In Europe, it's much more social, it's much more about wages, work conditions, employment, poverty. So you see, we have no unified definition. Okay. On top of that, a second reason for the allegation of greenwashing is that there is no homogeneity in the calculative methodologies themselves. Some companies do report only their own emissions, what we call scope 1, okay? Direct emissions from themselves. Okay? While some other companies, they would report not only scope 1, not only their direct emissions, but also their energy purchases, what we call scope 2, and sometimes all their purchases, so scope 3A. And some companies even go as far as reporting their own emissions all along the value chain, including downstream value chain, the use of the products and the services that they put on the market. Okay? So that's another reason for allegations of greenwashing, differences in the calculation and methodologies. The third reason, and I think that's the most important one, why we have allegations of greenwashing against ESG, is that ESG are socially constructed. Okay, so to a certain extent, they reflect the social, the political preferences and logics of those who are setting those measures. Okay, so we are very much in a process still. The social construction is still going on, and you need to understand that in this process, because where ESG came from, and because also of their position, investors are a major stakeholder. The problem is that with investors, the problem is that they tend to see ESG performance as a way to generate long-term financial performance. They don't see ESG performance as a goal in itself. Their goal is not to make this planet a more habitable one, but their goal is really to make sure that in the long term, the financial performance will still be there. Okay. So this triggers, for instance, the ongoing debate about double materiality. Maybe you have heard about double materiality. Double materiality, it's financial materiality and impact materiality. So financial materiality is about how the environment, for instance, is going to affect the financial performance of the company. This is financial materiality. While the impact materiality, the other way around, is how the company will affect the planet and the people, okay? Will impact the planet and the people. So, as you may understand, investors are mostly interested in financial materiality and not so much in impact materiality, okay? Another example also with investors, if you look at their voting recommendations before the general assemblies of the companies, they issue some voting recommendations, the investors. And if you look at these voting recommendations, investors are mostly interested in the G, governance. Well, you would expect that. I mean, they are owners of a firm, so they're really interested in the governance of a firm. They are increasingly interested also in the financial risks related or associated to the environment, but they are still very minimally interested into the S, into the social. By the way, Knowledge at HEC has published just a few weeks ago, addressing the S demands of important topic. Is it about land usage? Is it about toxicity? So you see, we have plenty of possible metrics, and there is no unified set of metrics. Okay. Same happens with the social, and the social is quite interesting because if you look, for instance, at Europe and North America, we would probably have a very different view on what the KPIs associated to the social are. In North America, social tends to be associated to equal rights, discrimination, gender, minority issues. Okay? In Europe, it's much more social, it's much more about wages, work conditions, employment, poverty. So you see, we have no unified definition. Okay. On top of that, a second reason for the allegation of greenwashing is that there is no homogeneity in the calculative methodologies themselves. Some companies do report only their own emissions, what we call scope 1, okay? Direct emissions from themselves, okay? While some other companies, they would report not only scope 1, not only their direct emissions, but also their energy purchases, what we call scope 2, and sometimes all their purchases, so scope 3A, and some companies even go as far as reporting their own emissions all along the value chain, including downstream value chain, the use of the products and the services that they put on the market. Okay, so that's another reason for allegations of greenwashing, differences in the calculation and methodologies. The third reason, and I think that's the most important one, why we have allegations of greenwashing against ESG, is that ESG are socially constructed. Okay, so they to a certain extent, they reflect the social, the political preferences and logics of those who are setting those measures. Okay, so we are very much in a process still. The social construction is still going on, and you need to understand that in this process, because where ESG came from, and because also of their position, investors are a major stakeholder. The problem is that with investors, the problem is that they tend to see ESG performance as a way to generate long-term financial performance. They don't see ESG performance as a goal in itself. Their goal is not to make this planet a more habitable one, but their goal is really to make sure that in the long term the financial performance will still be there. Okay, so this triggers, for instance, the ongoing debate about double materiality. Maybe you have heard about double materiality. Double materiality, it's financial materiality and impact materiality. So financial materiality is about how the environment, for instance, is going to affect the financial performance of the company. This is financial materiality. While the impact materiality, the other way around, is how the company will affect the planet and the people. Okay, will impact the planet and the people. So, as you may understand, investors are mostly interested in financial materiality and not so much in impact materiality. Okay. Another example also with investors, if you look at their voting recommendations before the general assemblies of the companies, they issue some voting recommendations, the investors, and if you look at these voting recommendations, investors are mostly interested in the G of governance. Well, you would expect that. I mean, they are owners of a firm, so they're really interested in the governance of a firm. They are increasingly interested also in the financial risks related or associated to the environment, but they are still very minimally interested into the S, into the social. By the way, knowledge at HEC has published just a few weeks ago, addressing the S demands of ESG. So I think this is really an important matter also to take into account. But when you look at investors, really they are a major stakeholder in the process, but they are not so fond of the S, I would say. So also on the global chessboard, I was mentioning Europe versus North America. I mean, this social construction sees major differences across regions, and to some extent, these differences reflect the voice given to the investors in the region. Okay. So in sum, why are there some allegations of greenwashing against ESG? Well, there is a high risk that ESG, as understood by investors, ESG as understood by companies in their investors' relations, will not save the planet. And this explains the allegations against ESG as a greenwashing tool. So I do strongly believe that there is a need to build a larger compromise on ESG metrics with all stakeholders, okay? So customers, consumers, employees, citizens, society at large, okay? But building this larger compromise is a process that takes time and sometimes some power struggle. I do agree that time is an issue, the pace of the change is an issue. But still, I mean, if we want to build this compromise, there is some negotiating at stake. Another question of the poll now. So, shall we get rid of ESG metrics because of greenwashing allegations? Okay. And 13% of you said that yes, we should get rid of ESG metrics because ESG is imperfect. Somewhere there is no way to make the ESG metrics right. 62% of you do believe that we should get rid of ESG metrics because ESG lost credibility. And only 25% of you said no, we should not get rid of ESG metrics because these metrics can help set targets and can contribute to manage and improve sustainability and taking this path of being more sustainable. So here I have to admit that I'm going to differ a little bit from you, and I will hopefully convince you with this masterclass that despite all the challenges, you're right, ESG is imperfect. You're right, ESG has lost a little bit of credibility. There is a current lack of convergence. But despite all these challenges, this is not a reason for throwing the baby with the bathwater. This is not a reason for throwing ESG with the bathwater. Okay? Measuring is very important. ESG metrics are helping the companies who want to do better, and accounting for sustainability has huge virtues. So these metrics, they are important, as I've just said, for setting targets. They are important for taking a path, and it's very much about taking a path. These metrics are important for managing the sustainability performance. And it's quite interesting because sometimes the same companies, the same large companies who are window dressing and dancing ESG in front of their investors, they are also trying to do good. Okay, so we should encourage them doing good and taking this path. Some companies have engaged into decarbonization strategies. They have also improved their accounting methodologies, their data collection. They are involving their finance people, their CFOs. So environmental performance, for instance, is invited to business reviews, to business meetings. And in the end, environmental performance, for instance, carbon emission can be managed by line managers. These carbon emissions, they can be budgeted, they can be monitored, just like we currently do with cost and euros. Okay. So, just because I was talking of a path, and that will be my final idea, I think that doing good for the planet will involve a change in business models. Okay, so this is really a path that needs to be taken. We want to encourage and drive action. Sometimes it's good to denounce, okay, but I think it's even better to act, to start on this path. Okay, and decarbonization strategies are very much a first step for the companies who are trying to do good. A second step will be to shift the business model. In many industries, shifting the business model will mean moving towards, for instance, circular business model, circular economy. And we even have a few companies who are at the first step. They are the most advanced one, what we call the regenerative companies. They have pledged to generate positive externalities, no negative externalities anymore. And they have really developed detailed roadmaps, detailed KPIs, detailed metrics to do so. Admittedly, usually these companies are B Corp companies, or at least companies that are a little bit protected from the disciplines, if I may say so, of the financial markets. But this is the path that should be taken. Decarbonization, shifting the business model, moving towards regeneration. And I do believe that ESG metrics are key in taking this path, but I guess you have understood me, not just the investor-dominated approach of ESG. Okay. So in sum, ESG is challenging, I agree with you. It is not flawless. Like any accounting device, it is a social construction, which is still currently at work. But still, we absolutely need these metrics for setting targets, for improving things, and doing good in terms of ESG will require much more than window dressing. It will require major shifts in the business models of many industries. So really, I think action is required, and ESG metrics can help measuring action. So the floor is open now for your questions. So I'll have a look at what is coming in. You mentioned L'Oréal as a pioneer of ESG since 2012, which is not, ESG has been introduced in 2020, so 2012 it was really the CSR department that was created. And the question is, but do such companies really respect the new laws to protect the environment, or cruelty-free products? More locally, companies like Orpea were very well rated in terms of ESG, but their very bad treatment of the elderly has been revealed. So what are the best ways for companies to regain trust after such scandals? I think the question of trust is a very, very important question. And unfortunately, about trust, once you've lost it, it takes a lot of effort to build it back, okay? So it's something which is, we can be rather rapidly decreasing or going down, and it will take a lot of effort to bring it back. So I mean, obviously this is a good example of a flow, and a scandal typically points at something that is wrong. To some extent, the scandal is good because it denounces something that should be denounced, and it should be taken as an improvement improvement, possibility. The thing is that usually it damages the trust towards ESG metrics. It damages trust towards these companies, the ones you have mentioned. And this will take a very long time to rebuild the trust. So that's unfortunately the situation. Mark asks, are the regulations in the EU enough to reduce carbon or greenhouse gas emissions in the world? Unfortunately, probably not. So your question is well thought. The EU itself alone won't make it. Okay, so we need a more global movement. Now, I think that if Europe takes the lead, if the EU takes the lead, shows the path, well, then it's even better. But again, it's about building a compromise, and sometimes it's a very difficult thing to hear for countries who are less responsible somewhere of what is going on, because their emissions are lower and they are not the one mostly responsible for the current situation, but they will also be the ones suffering the most from the current situation. So I think they also need to understand that, and then I guess I talked several times about North America. I think if we need to embark two regions of the world very, very strongly with these topics and these issues, it is certainly North America and China. In North America, as I said, part of the problem with ESG metrics is that the acronym has been captured by the investment world and investors. So it's very much a very financial view of ESG. So it's about trying to curb this trend, and I would just rely on EU to make the trend. We cannot do. We have to do what we have to do first. Okay. Okay. I have more questions coming in. Let me have a look. What are the current initiatives to standardize ESG measures? And it's a very interesting one. Actually, at this point in time, convergence is not there yet, and I think it will still take time. But there are some efforts actually to try to converge more, and we currently have two models, I would say. So in terms of standard setting for ESG reporting, at this point in time we have a European model on one hand, and we have the model of the International Sustainability Standard Board, and there is still not much convergence. They don't even have convergence on basic principles like the double materiality. So on the EU side, the CSRD I was mentioning, it's very much based on double materiality. It's public and legally enforced standards that are going to be progressively enforced to a large perimeter of companies, a large number of companies in Europe. So it's public and it's mandatory, and it's going to be legally enforced. Okay, and it's based on double materiality. While the International Sustainability Standard Board, which is mostly UK based, these are private standards but these standards have some globally, so especially in the UK, in North America, but these are private issued standard by an organization which is affiliated to the International Accounting Standard Board. So the International Sustainability Standard Board is I would say, close to the ISB. And they are really mostly focused on financial materiality and voluntary disclosure. So companies are not compelled to disclose, to be transparent, but it's more provide them with incentives, reward them, I would say, with you know, good reputation with the investors. Okay, so you clearly see two different models. The models differ also in terms of how demanding they are. The EU model is much more demanding. As I said, large number of companies are concerned in terms of depth, detail of what is required, and also it should be verified and audited. Okay, so you clearly see two models here. Which model will prevail? I cannot tell you at this point. This battle of norms is still very much going on. I hope it will be to some extent the European model, for sure. Now, we have to be very careful also because I think Europe has a strong tendency to regulate a lot. And this at some point can become counterproductive in terms of it can freeze the action of the companies. So it could really be a problem for the competitiveness of European companies. We can protect the European companies on the European soil. For instance, there are some public measures like the CABM, the carbon adjusted border mechanism. So it's kind of, since the European companies have to more strict, more stringent regulations, we try to make these regulations also for the companies who want to import to Europe. Now, outside Europe, it's very much out of the control of public policy makers in Europe. So that's where we are. So we have to be a little bit careful also not to freeze action. That's my point. So over-regulation sometimes tends to be also an issue. But for sure, it takes some regulation and some demands. More questions? How do we make sure startups can incorporate ESG metrics into their KPIs and not making it all about fundraising? Well, the problem of smaller companies is a real issue. For small companies, it's a lot of, ESG metrics can become really a lot of work, a lot of burden. The CSRD supposes that also, smaller companies will be concerned. They will also have to report, but it's true that for them the effort is comparatively bigger. Okay, and for startups, as you mentioned, it's a lot about also fundraising and getting the funds that they want to have. So it's a lot about this investor thing that I was mentioning. But apart from this idea that there might be a little bit of communication and from the startups, it's also an issue when you're a small company to get the metrics right, because you have less resources. Okay, and I think there was another question about the data. The data, the quality of the data, the quality of databases that we have also for computing for the calculative methodologies is really an issue. Okay, I've seen a company, I won't name it, but I think it's a good example in terms of ESG metrics. It's in an industry which is not a very good industry actually for the planet. They are constructing roads, but we still need roads. Thing is, the way we construct roads at this point in time is not very good for the planet, not for the biodiversity, not for the GHG emission. They have improved very seriously their GHG emission, their carbon accounting, their GHG emission accounting, and they have done so by decorrelating actually the calculation from the revenues. So they used to have a traditional method where they would multiply the revenues associated to an activity by an emission factor. And instead of that, right now, they have improved their methodology, and along the value chain, they look at the consumption of different materials, raw materials, and this helps them a lot because now they have action levers. Okay, so it's not all about degrowth, because a company is not unfortunately set up for degrowth. It's much more about trying to identify among your purchases which one are going to be better, emitting less in terms of carbon, in terms of GHG emissions. So for instance, you can use recycled steel, you can use low carbon concrete, you can use low temperature asphalt instead of high temperature asphalt. And they have only been able to see that, to visualize that, because now their calculation method is not based just on revenue, but it's based really on the flows, the physical flows of purchases that they have. And on top of it, it means that we have a high level of convergence between their financial reporting and their carbon reporting, because it's based on the same data, which is also an issue. It's the issue of coherence between the financial and the sustainability reporting. So I think it answers partially maybe the question of route. I'm a CEO of a small company. I can't stop my expansion, or I'll fire my staff and use natural resources. So what can I do to help the planet and be ESG compliant? Any piece of advice? I think it starts with decorrelating really the GHG emissions from just the revenues, trying to understand with more granularity what makes you consume more carbon and more GHG emissions. And then you have action levers. That's exactly what I was trying to say. You mentioned time is a constraint. What other alternatives do you see? That's a question by Julia from the Netherlands. Could we have like the science-based target initiatives being extended to this problem? I think the science-based target initiatives are very much related to decarbonation strategies. Hopefully in the nearest future, we'll also have science-based target initiatives for nature, not just for carbon, but also for biodiversity. Yeah, time is a constraint, and on the other hand, we cannot rush too much this process, because I think if we rush too much the process is going to be at the advantage of the investors as a main stakeholder right now, okay? And this is not what we want. So we want to make sure that there will be compromise building, and that all the stakeholders will be taken into account. And this, unfortunately, takes time. Now, I am aware that the pace of action is an issue. In terms of metrics themselves, I know that there is a lot of work currently going on about biodiversity, and I think that's the next very important topic. Actually, in terms of planetary boundaries, the boundaries for nature, the boundaries for biodiversity are already exceeded, which is not yet the case for GHG emissions. However, the difference is that, and that's a good news actually. For nature, we can reverse things, okay? So we can act and get some nature back, I would say. For carbon and for GHG emission, we will also be able to do that, but it will be much longer term. So actually, when the GHG emissions are going over the limit, I would say, before we can really go back, it will take decades. Decades of potentially very difficult decades in terms of climate. So that's another point. Let me find another one. Okay, I like this one from Johnny from England. You seem to stigmatize or to oppose the Greta Thunberg generation. Got the mic fixed, and I'm back with you. We were talking about the younger generation. So again, far from me the idea to stigmatize, and I think it's good to denounce. It's good. I wouldn't use the term attack, but maybe at least denounce and peacefully say this is not right. Okay, so I think this is good. Okay, this is good as long as it triggers improvement. Okay, this is not good if it freezes action and nothing happens because of that. Okay, so this is what I fear always with radicality, and that was very much my business paradox at the beginning. We need to embark the business on this major business transition. Okay, and every step is good to take. Now we also need to push sometimes a little bit action forward, and we need to push the companies to go a little bit faster and to move faster, that for sure. And this young generation is also, I mean, doing that by their actions, so that's good. But we also need to help them finding the action levers, making progress with metrics. We need to get to understand where they come from in order to help them move into this direction and take this path, and otherwise it won't work. So thank you very much again. I think this is the end of the Q&A and the end of this masterclass. And your questions were very interesting. So thank you for being with us today.